The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of how physical processes in the brain give rise to the subjective experience of the mind and of the world. If you look at the brain from the outside, you see this extraordinary machine, an organ consisting of 84 billion neurons that fire in synchrony with each other. When I see, visual inputs come to my eyes, photons hit my eyes. They send a signal that goes up the optic nerve to the back of my brain. It sends neural firings propagating throughout my brain, and eventually I might produce an action. From the outside, though, I look like a complicated mechanism, a robot. This is how science might describe me from the objective point of view. But there's also a subjective point of view. There's what it feels like for the agent who is seeing the scene. When I see you, I see colors, I see shapes, I have an experience from a first-person point of view. There's something it's like to be me. And this is the conscious experience of seeing. It's part of the inner movie of the mind. This inner movie has many, many dimensions. It has the dimension of vision, it has the dimension of sound, like a normal movie, but it also has touch and taste and smell. It has emotions, it has thought, it has a sense of one's body. All of this is subjective experience. And it's one of the most familiar facts in the world that we have this subjective experience. But it's also one of the most mysterious. Why is it that these physical processes in the brain should produce subjective experience? Why doesn't it go on in the dark without any consciousness at all? No one right now knows the answer to this question. So in the science and philosophy of consciousness, people use the word consciousness for many different things, and some of the things are easier to explain than other things. So sometimes I like to distinguish between the easy problems of consciousness and the hard problem. The easy problems are not really so easy. They're as difficult as most problems in science, but it's the hard problem that's really the mystery. So sometimes we use consciousness just for the difference between being awake and being asleep. And we say, well, how is it that a system could be awake and on its feet and responding? Maybe for this, we can have an explanation in terms of the right neural mechanism in the head that produces this behavior. Eventually, we'll explain this, one of the easy problems. How is it that the perceptual system can discriminate some information and respond to it? How is it the brain can monitor itself? Again, in principle, that's a question about objective processing. An explanation in terms of neurons in the brain could explain it. So for all of these, we have accepted paradigms from science, come up with some mechanism in terms of neurons that produce this behavior, then we've solved the problem. So those are the easy problems. The hard problem, by contrast, is the problem of how it is that all these processes give rise to subjective experience. And what's distinctive about this is it doesn't seem to be a problem about objective mechanisms, about, for example, behaviors that the brain produces. We could tell a complete story about the objective mechanisms in the brains, the neurons that fire, the behaviors they produce, and so on, explaining all these functions: awakeness, responsiveness, discrimination, monitoring. And there might still be a further question. Why is all that associated with subjective experience? It's just a different kind of question. I think ultimately it's a question for science, but it's a question which right now our scientific methods don't have a very good handle on. So at least for now, it's a central question for philosophy. Now, philosophy has a great history of turning its questions into science. Many of the great sciences started as areas of philosophy. Physics was originally part of philosophy until Newton developed his physical theories in the 17th century. Once he figured out how to solve it, then it became a science. Something similar happens with linguistics and psychology and economics. I would like eventually consciousness to turn into a problem for science. But first of all, philosophy needs to do its work with this problem to make it tractable. Right now, we're just in the stage where philosophy and science are cooperating on solving this problem. The scientists are now starting to think about consciousness for the first time in some years, but it's still at the level of thinking about correlations. Correlations between the brain and consciousness, rather than the level of fundamental explanations. But we can hope that eventually we might have some theory of the connections between the brain and consciousness. My own view, though, is it will not be a purely reductionist or physical explanation. We won't explain consciousness purely in terms of the brain. In terms of the brain, you'll get a good solution to the easy problems, to the various behaviors, and so on. But you'll never get a full solution to the hard problem. Why is all this accompanied by experience? Rather, what we need to do is to take conscious experience itself as primitive, as a fundamental element of the world. It's the same attitude we take towards space and time and mass in physics. We don't reduce them to something more fundamental. But then we come up with fundamental laws that govern them and that can explain them. So in physics, the physicists say we're looking for fundamental theory in physics so simple, maybe you could write it on the front of a t-shirt. For consciousness, maybe we want a story of the fundamental laws connecting the brain and consciousness. So simple, we can write it on the front of a t-shirt. And the fundamental principles that connect brain processes to consciousness. Right now, we don't know what those fundamental principles might be. There are some ideas. The neuroscientist Giulio Tononi thinks it might be some principles involving integrated information. So that when the brain integrates, there's a fundamental law that says when the brain integrates enough information, then you get consciousness. I mean, this does raise many of the traditional aspects of the philosophical mind-body problem. What is the place of consciousness in the physical world, and how does it exert a causal role? Is consciousness something separate from all the brain processes that exert some effect on the brain, as many of the traditional dualists say? The view I'm attracted to is that consciousness is actually present at a fundamental level, inside the brain and inside all physical processes. This is the traditional philosophical view known as panpsychism, that maybe all of physics involves some element of consciousness at the basic level. Somehow all of this composes to yield my consciousness. It's a beautiful, unified, attractive view of the world where consciousness and the physical world might be integrated all the way down. The big problem for this view is, again, another version of the hard problem, but now in the version, how can these small bits of consciousness at the fundamental level add up to the kind of single, unified conscious experience that I have? People call this the combination problem. How do the atoms of consciousness combine to yield human consciousness? Nobody right now has a solution to that problem, but at least people are thinking about it. So right now we're in a real period, I think, of ferment and excitement with many ideas about how to solve this problem. Nothing like a consensus yet.
That is your body, distinctly established. Right now, it is 100% like this. I don't know what you're drinking, I can't see, but whatever you're drinking, what's in the cup is not you. The moment you drink it, after some time it becomes you. It's happening right now. So, though what you think is your body and what I think is my body is just a piece of this planet, right now it is distinctly clear, this is my body, that is your body, 100%. This is my mind and that is your mind. These are my emotions and those are your emotions. These are my experiences, those are your experiences. But there is no such thing as my consciousness and your consciousness. This is a living consciousness. We blew our own bubble. I'm sure you have that little wonderful boy who came on the screen, I'm sure he's blowing soap bubbles at you sometime. So, if you blow a soap bubble, this is my bubble, that's your bubble. Poop, it went. Then there is no such thing as my bubble and your bubble, there is no such thing as my air and your air. Consciousness is just like that. Right now you have blown your bubble, I have blown my bubble. This is me, that is you. But when this goes poop, there is no such thing as my consciousness and your consciousness. It is just that we are holding a certain amount of… If you want to call it as consciousness, I would prefer to call it as life, because the word consciousness, as you're speaking, I'm seeing that even last time when we spoke to all Bala's friends, what I see is wakefulness and consciousness, there is no clear distinction in medical terminology. See, everything that you do with your anesthesia has nothing to do with consciousness. It has something to do with body and various functions of the body. You're shutting down certain aspects of the bodily functions. One of them is transmission of pain, which is the main interest when somebody is going to surgery. You don't want to stop their heart, you don't want to stop their brain, you would like to see the transmission of pain stops. Whatever is being cut, whatever damage or fixing is happening, whatever parts of the body may be being removed, what is not vital may be being pulled out, all that is happening. Only transmission of pain is not happening. This has got nothing to do with losing consciousness and gaining consciousness, there's no such thing. So we're using the word wakefulness and consciousness in a little different way. And not only that, especially not just in medical terminology, generally in English language, there is no distinction between somebody is unconscious and he became conscious and consciousness as a larger possibility. So, my body, your body, my intelligence, my mind, my memory, your memory, my experiences, your experience, all different. But there is no such thing as my consciousness and your consciousness. It is just that it is only the human creature on this planet who has the neurological capability and sophistication of mechanism that if they allow it, they can access this dimension of consciousness. No other creature is really capable of accessing it. This doesn't mean there is no consciousness in them. Without that, the life process wouldn't happen. There is consciousness even where there is no body, all right? Only thing is, you need a certain sophisticated instrument to access that, which is the human mechanism. This is why we consider being human is a great privilege, because you have access to dimensions beyond your physical boundaries. That is the fundamental significance of being human. So, let us not misunderstand the instrument and what we see. If you take a telescope and see, you saw another galaxy, but the galaxy is not produced by the telescope, the galaxy is there. The telescope only gave you an access. Similarly, your body, your brain, whatever, I don't want to identify different things. From your hair to your toes, everything is body as far as I'm concerned, including your brain. It is just another dimension of the body. So this body, if we keep it in a certain way, if we do not contaminate it with too many ideas, philosophies, identities, if you keep it in a certain level of openness, this will become an access point to what we are referring to as consciousness or the basis of the life that we are, in a way. So somebody can call it consciousness, somebody can call it a being, somebody says this is God. Well, we can use as much vocabulary as you want. Essentially, we are trying to put a meaning on something which cannot be defined, which has no meaning. Meaning is a consequence of human psychological process. Psychological process is a consequence of accumulated memory. So you cannot slap one meaning from your mind upon a limitless possibility which is the very basis of our existence. So this is what is the fundamental mistake, that we are trying to take a piece of our psychological process and trying to understand what is consciousness. Consciousness is not something that you can understand. Understand means there must be a meaning. There is no meaning to it. There is no meaning to the existence. It's just a tremendous phenomena, but you can experience it. You have the necessary instruments to experience it, not the instruments in your lab. You as a person, you have the necessary instrument to experience this. Will you allow it or not, is the only question. As I said in the beginning, it all depends on how you are identified. If your identifications are limited, you have lost the ability to experience it. If your identity is, not identified with anything, you kept yourself loose like that, then there is a possibility of experiencing it. A whole lot of people under drug-induced conditions, they are claiming they experience many things. I'm not questioning that at all, it's very much possible, because one thing that I have seen happening to people under the influence of alcohol or drug is, they've lost their sense of identity. What they think they are usually is not there in them, they've become little boundaryless. Because of that, they might have accessed a certain dimension, But will that make them competent to access it whenever they want? No, 100% not. In fact, they may lose their faculties because they forced it upon, chemically forced something to happen, so that may not… that may damage the instrument for good and you may not be able to experience anything beyond a certain point.